Thank you to everyone for joining. We will get started in just a few minutes. We're just letting others join and get situated. Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, From Distributed Tracing to Logs and Back, How Decisiv Troubleshoots Issues. My name is Becky, and I'll be your moderator today. We're excited to have Hunter Madison, Senior SRE at Decisiv, Michela Manchopi, Product Manager at Instana, and James Montefield, Solution Architect Lead at Humio. Before I hand over to our speakers, I have a few housekeeping items to cover regarding this webinar. Today's webinar will be recorded and it will be available on demand after the live session. We will send this to you via email, or alternatively, you can access it through Instana's website. We'd really like to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, please feel free to send it through the chat box on the right-hand side. We'll be answering questions as we go. If we don't get your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. So without any further ado, I'd like to kick things off by handing it over to our speakers.
All right. Hello, everyone. I have here Hunter and James, and today is gonna be a mix of demo and panel-like discussion. Moreover, we would love to keep it lively, so please do ask us hard questions as we are in the process of discussing how logging, distributed tracing, and overall observability is converging in many use cases, and what parts still remain different. To get us started, we would give a small round of introductions about the three parties here. One is Hunter, the other is Instana, represented by me, and then Humio, represented by James. So Hunter, do you want to start?
Sure. So hi, I'm Hunter Madison. I've been in the industry for about a decade doing a lot of SRE and development type work. I've worked at, e-commerce companies doing $1 million+ a day worth of sales, business to business companies, and, had to deal with applications going from nothing to a massive amount of traffic, and along the way picked up a lot of observability and, tracing tips and tricks that I hopefully get to share with you all today.
Jamie, you're next.
I'm the solution architect for Humio in EMEA. Actually joined Humio at the beginning of this year. Before that, I spent most of my career doing what you'd now call DevOps, software development toolchain, integrations around all of that sort of work. Specializing probably in safety critical engineering in automotive and aerospace and a bit of banking and that sort of thing. More recently, I've spent a couple of years in the machine data analytics space. So I'm pretty familiar with the space. And obviously I'm here representing Humio as part of this discussion. For a bit of background on Humio, we're actually a relatively young company working in this we say logging, and we'll come into more of what we really mean by logging, but the log aggregation and analytics space. Humio is really specialized in logging at scale, performance of the platform, and Hunter's going to be talking a bit more about that as we go.
From my side, I'm Michele. I'm the technical product manager at Instana for anything related to distributed tracing. Instana is an APM tool for modern microservices systems. It works like magic on Kubernetes, it works on VMware Tanzu, it works on a bunch of other platforms, serverless. And what we provide you is the best distributed tracing in the industry with no sampling, all requests traced with very little overhead. And we are fundamentally complementary to Humio in that we do all the part of our distributed tracing, but for example, we do not ingest. all logs, only those that are generated throughout serving a request. So for example, all your startup logs are not there in Instana, but all the rest is. So this is actually the differences between Instana and Humio are rather well outlined in terms of the use cases that different tools cover. So maybe James, you would like to give us an overview of the use cases that Humio regularly covers.
So Humio really interacts with our customers and our prospective customers around two key use cases. We have customers coming to us with operational observability challenges, and then the second, actually more common use cases around information security and complementing traditional security products in the enterprise. What we found is that there are organizations out there that just have machine data problems or logging problems at a really huge scale. Everything from a few hundred gigabytes a day up to hundreds of terabytes a day of logging. And there's different things driving the needs for that. So we see requirements from the operational observability, DevOps world, really understanding that things are operating as they should, and making sure you have enough detail in that logging and that information from your environment to understand when things have gone wrong. The other things that we see a lot are things like governance, just general controls that require all information related to things like financial transactions to be recorded and retained for a certain period of time. One good example of that is some recent banking regulations have changed in Turkey as a good example, and essentially every piece of machine data that is related to financial transactions has to be retained for 10 years, but also available for querying basically in real time. So we're seeing a huge driver from that compliance and governance side of things. Security is another great use case. There's a lot of security products on the market, but again, they generally struggle with very, very high volumes of data with long-term retention. Security, we can talk about a whole different aspect, but it's quite an interesting topic. And then the other thing that Humio is really specialized in is the extent to which we can compress and hold your machine data. People have found that Humio is actually a very reliable system of record. We have an extremely dense format for the way we store the data, and it offers very, very efficient long-term retention. It's more efficient than potentially taking the raw data and compressing it and storing it as you sort of traditionally would. So there's lots of things driving people's needs for logging platforms today. And we're going to talk a bit more about the convergence of these things later on. But what we find is, as much as new trends come about, the memo that developers write to themselves in the future is still very key to understanding what's happening in people's systems. The last thing I'd really add that Humio is trying to do is take these sorts of solutions and elevate them beyond work group level tools. We find that there's hundreds of options for individual teams to solve these sorts of problems. What's been really interesting is when organizations want to get that level of observability available across the whole enterprise, make it sort of consistent across teams, and really ensure that they have this visibility and this long-term system of record of all this information all in one place. That's been really, really critical. So they're the main things that are driving people to not just logging platforms, but Humio specifically.
Yeah, for Instana, the use cases around DevOps are the same. Instana, like Humio, is going to collect every single piece of data that you send at it and retain it for a certain amount of time. In terms of distributed tracing and performance management, there are more relaxed requirements in terms of long-term data retention. For example, if you were to compare how your application was faring with the last Black Friday compared to this one, probably you have done significant changes to the application in the meanwhile. So the performance and metrics that you have in terms of how it scales, what rate of processing, where is the latency coming from, are probably changing somewhat. But for example, what we see Instana customers really wanting is to keep the baseline, to know, for example, what their end users we're doing in terms of requests, so that they can be better prepared the next year, or at least to make sure that, assuming that the load changes in a certain thing, hopefully increasing, then they will know how to tune, for example, for load tests. That's a use case we see a lot. We also see, of course, observability is around seasonality. Seasonality for modern systems can be daily, can be weekly. It's related also to the release cycle, depending on how quick you put something into production, how often you ship. Your needs in terms of seasonality for example, calculating the baseline of performance will change. If you ship every day, you probably have a seasonality more related in terms of, well, the time of the week for how the users interface with their application. Like back office is going to be during office hours, right? If you ship every 3 weeks or a month, then the seasonality you care about is longer than your development cycle, because you want to make sure that the stuff you ship today works comparably, or there are no regressions, or hopefully it gets better than what you had there the last time you shipped. Yeah. And then I think Hunter has seen both of the sides of this coin coming together, right?
Yeah, so I've generally taken a more mediator type role between developer and operations at places that I've worked. And I've also taken a lot of mediation roles out with support. So I think where you see a lot of these tools come together and really, really start to shine, and these are the demos that we're going to run through in a minute, is the confluence where you have a, very, very high cardinality data source being APM data, logging to handle a lot of the, everything else cases, and using the tooling inside of Instana and Humio to bring them together into workflows that you can, turn around and give to your tier 1, phone support team, and let them be able to go and start handling some of these tickets that they get in real time, where you get like this really wonderful feedback loop to where if support can diagnose the entire problem by, looking at a couple of pages after you've spent a half an hour worth of training, it saves them so much time. It saves you so much time organizationally. And it makes your company seem like, you're really, really on the ball, because you're able to immediately tell customers, yeah, this is your problem. This is your, support steps to fix it, which is really, really cool.
This is actually one of the recent trends in observability, something that I came really to appreciate the last decade. The fact that observability, being able to troubleshoot issues, is becoming a shared responsibility, because that is the way to scale out. If you have only a few subject matter experts, or the central monitoring tool that is able to first assess that there is an issue and to do something about it, you're going to be necessarily slower. And that team is gonna become, in many cases, to have a lot of tribal knowledge that makes it harder to distribute this important function to maybe less qualified personnel on average from a technical perspective.
Yeah, the other thing that I've found as well, and I get into this as one of our demos, is the fact that there's a lot of like non-traditional sources of platform health that companies will have. For me, the big one is NPS survey data. So we were able to take all these NPS surveys that we did, Net Promoter Score, where we asked people like, well, what are the problems that you have with us? And taking that information in, validating it against logs and traces, and being able to then, turn around to the development side of things and say like, hey, we found all these problems the customers were pointing in. Here's the exact trace where this problem got caused. Being able to say like, we know exactly what went wrong. We know exactly when it went wrong, and we know exactly how to fix it is really, really huge, especially if you are doing, very customer heavy workflows in terms of, PM and development cycle.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, we, as I mentioned in the beginning, we always position Humio around the operational visibility or the security use case, but there's always that third sort of business intelligence, business insights layer. We don't generally lead with that because we're not a BI tool, but it's always impressive actually to see what our customers have built on top of those sort of layers of knowledge. That's really interesting.
At least personally, having dealt with a large number of BI tools over the years, Humio could totally sell itself as a BI tool with its dashboarding and like query setup, and I would totally buy it.
Yeah. Oh, there's lots of things we could do. Yeah.
That's actually the point that that Hunter picked up around be able to troubleshoot every single problem for every single person. That's the biggest argument one can find, for example, in the current the distributed tracing world, where sampling is by many systems, by many vendors sold to you as almost a necessity, even when there are some vendors that will trace all requests, but then they will keep only some traces, and most traces only for a very short amount of time, meaning that you need to be very quick in responding to issues to be able to have the yes, I know exactly what happened to you, your customer, or you end up on the sampling world of probably this happened. It's similar to that other one. It's yeah. I blame the mindset of sampling to well, the company that has introduced distributed tracing to the modern world. It's Google with Dapper. A similar project was running in parallel at Twitter, the Big Blue Bird, which fundamentally brings us Zipkin today. And at that scale, without having huge investments in refining the overhead of the instrumentation and refining the process of sampling. I understand why they went for sampling, but the mindset of sampling has percolated through, for example, vendors, through open source projects, and I think it's actually bad.
Yeah, well, and this is just what I found personally. And I think almost every paper and thing Google releases like this, I am endlessly grateful that companies like Google, Microsoft through Microsoft Research, Uber, Twitter, Amazon, Netflix, all the FANG groups, giving away software as open source and giving away papers and letting everyone else learn from what they've learned. The problem though is that they're learning at such an insane scale. I will probably, unless I work for Google, I will never have a company that has a Google-sized problem where I have to sample. Generally speaking, I could keep all of the requests that were made, for Custom Ink, which was a high traffic e-commerce company. I actually could keep them all in memory if I wanted to for a day's worth of sales. Not that that's smart, but when you sit down and you think about it, you don't have the data volume that Google has.
Yeah, this is a big debate that we're having in the market in general at the moment as well, is the argument of should you log everything? Again, Humio is really trying to get that cost of ownership down where that becomes a reasonable thing to propose. And what's really interesting is we talk to customers and they come to us and say we're logging 300 gig a day at the moment, and we have to guide them through this conversation of if you could log everything, what would that really look like? And quite often it's 5 to 10 times what they really log today. And we've seen organizations have to make really sad compromises on what they log and what they monitor and how they run continuous queries and stuff over that data, just because of cost of ownership, either from an infrastructure point of view or from a license point of view. There's the growing rise of platforms offering unlimited retention, unlimited ingest, that sort of thing. It's really interesting what the log everything argument brings up.
The same argument, by the way, is happening with matrices. So, for example, you can look today at the kind of matrices you get, for example, from Kubernetes. And then I need to wonder how often someone goes and looks at the amount of CPU weight on the third core of the fifth CPU of that particular worker node. Yeah, I know 100.
I have to run these things, man.
That's the thing. It's not something that you often look at. It's something that is important to observe and know where there is an issue. But it is data that you should keep a system of record. That's a different topic, right? So maybe we jump into the demos.
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. And then apologize for the warp tunnel. Yeah, so I just want to talk through a few of the observability workflows that I've put together. And note on all this, this is coming from our real Instana deployment and a real Humio deployment. I have removed some stuff, which you'll see is like complete blurs in some of the demo videos. And specifically, there's a really nice integration between Decisiv and Humio that I can't show, because to show that would leak a bunch of information. That
You mean Instana and Humio?
Sorry, Instana and Humio.
And we all integrate with Decisiv.
Yes, everything is just wires everywhere. But so before I get into that, I just kind of want to talk through, the way that I view a lot of like the operational workflow for dealing with incidents it's kind of something like this. So from my perspective, you have some incoming trigger, and traditionally it could be an alert from Instana or something like Nagios. It could be a support ticket, or it could be an account manager saying, hey, people have been complaining that like X feature is up. From there, you run into like these series of internal workflows that you have. So maybe it's checking your email server. Maybe it's you're sitting down and trying to validate, like, is this net promoter survey that we have accurate? Are we going to look at third-party integrations? I'm going to log into this box and make sure that this process is up. I'm going to, take a look at metrics being emitted from a load balancer and make sure that they're healthy. Like everybody, you build these flowcharts up as your ecosystem and your applications, evolve and develop. And then this, flows into a reporting workflow where you're, notifying customers with, a status page, and then, your post-mortem process. And what I really like is the fact that if you build up, logging and observability right, a lot of this stuff you can actually do without really having the technical background into the system. So the 3 workflows that I want to talk through, looking at third-party integrations, NPS validation, and email, this is all stuff that we were giving to our, tier 1 on the phone support team to let them diagnose, the top 3 issues that were coming up, be able to resolve them, and, notify and keep customers informed, all without having to, drag developers and operations into it, which I think is really nice because it saves everyone time at the end, and it gives the customer the most responsive feedback. So the first one's third-party integrations. Decisiv integrates with a lot of third-party services. They have different deployment profiles ranging from we're talking to another cloud provider, or, they're running it on-premise. Decisiv, the bit being, handles dealer management systems and warranties for trucks. So basically, we're able to use dependency information derived from these traces to offer really quick insights into the root cause of many of the integration issues that we'd suffer from, where we're trying to talk to a dealership, the dealership has a problem, and that problem bubbles up in a weird way in the site. So a quick video of that is just in Instana. I can take a look at our applications, take a look at the services, and honestly just search for HTTP services and sort by error rate. And the things that are at the top with a really high error rate, you can just call out to the person who's responsible for it externally and have them resolve it. And this is the quick 2-minute, not even 2-minute check. Hey, is this thing up? No, it's not. Let's call someone and tell the customer we've called someone.
That's
really
actually
quick.
One of my favorite stories of last year. One of our customers is one of the biggest retailers of sports equipment in the US, and one of our technical account managers, Andy Skelton, was going in to give a training. So he crosses the door, and there was already the director of SRE there that said, you already saved the day today, because one of their third-party providers actually had a problem. And they knew before the provider because they saw what Instana was telling them in real time. It's key. And that they calculated they saved them a few $100,000 because it was really high volume.
Oh, totally. So the second workflow I want to talk through quickly is NPS validation. So Decisiv, they run a net promoter score. At the dealer level, the idea being is we send them a survey. We ask them, like, how much would you recommend it? I did this with the support director. At one point, we sat down in a nice 3-hour session and actually used our tracing data to validate all the NPS surveys and see, like, is this person accurate? Like, what are they complaining about? Is it us? Is it, the fact that they're running on a dial-up modem? or, they have 30 computers on a DSL line, What was really cool was being able to figure all that out and like really start to drill into end user concerns using custom tracing and custom metrics in that. So here's a quick example of that where we have a custom internal trace and we send the dealer identifier over to Instana. We can use that to identify things that are slow, like they're complaining, hey, search is slow. And, that lets me get down to a trace. I can see where they come from. I can see everything that's involved in making that slow. And from there, be able to go debug, diagnose what the problem is, and, get fixes in place. Specifically, though, this is designed to be slow, so that way this type of query gets generated and shows up. It's a synthetic user, not an actual person. And then I think the last workflow that I want to talk through is email. So there's an interesting quirk about the application that we use is that it basically has a mailing list mode in it. So when people are getting things repaired, it will send emails. They can reply to those emails, and we ingest the email back into the platform. So someone could do an entire email workflow for resolving their issue with their truck, and the people working on it could use the web UI. This means email delivery and receipt is very important. And what's really cool about this is that infrastructure metrics let us do really high diagnoses, but then the logging features of Humio lets us build a really powerful ad hoc tool for digging in and diagnosing email issues for that tier 1 support member to use. So from the Instana side of things, I can go through, use my wonderful replies filter to pull up the server that's responsible for it. Give it a quick scroll down and take a look at the one metric that it emits, which is talking about the number of emails that it has yet to read. If that's looking fine, I can check a custom dashboard, which talks about the error rate on that import process. And if that's all looking good, I can debug it at a per email level. Now, for what it's worth, this is where there's a missing bit, which again, I had to censor for security reasons, where you would click into Instana and it would take you into this view in Humio. But this is a nice overview where I can go in, give it an email or part of an email, and I'm searching right now for different sources of logs, but I'm able to create a single unified view for the support team, combining Amazon logs, application logs, and the logs from Dovecode on an inbound mail server into a single view that they're able to work with. And that's all that I have in terms of demos. So do we have any questions or points people would like us to touch on?
How much time do you estimate that introducing Instana and Humio has freed up from your engineering teams by outsourcing this troubleshooting to customer support?
I would say probably 4 to 5 hours a week, roughly.
For an entire team or single individuals?
For the entire team.
So that means fundamentally 4 to 5 hours per team member. Or
oh, okay. So if we want to do it on a per team member, I would say it saves about an hour per person per week.
Mm-hmm. And how much does it make faster the resolution of problems?
Specifically, it doesn't make. I found when dealing with customer issues, it doesn't necessarily make the resolution faster, but it makes identifying the problem faster to where you can get to the point to have that discussion with the customer. So like with the email stuff, generally what happens is that their email provider blacklists, Amazon's email provider. And like, we can't fix their email, but we can tell them this is their problem. And being able to tell them that that's their problem, generally means that we're able to respond fast to them. Then they're able to work with their IT team to get the solution resolved on their side.
And they're less in the dark.
Right. Because what I've like what I've generally found with a lot of these types of IT problems is that like you can say, yeah, there's a problem, but being able to tell people there's a problem, here are fixes for that problem. Once you get the person to that point, like the problem still may be persisting, but people are much less agitated over its presence.
Yeah, that sort of speed up is something that, again, we see quite consistently with our customers. People use Humio for various different reasons, but one of the really consistent pieces of feedback is just how quickly they can traverse the data without even necessarily having to understand where particular attributes are stored. I had another customer recently that I was working with, and they had some really standard run books that they would go through to find problematic issues in the history of their application. People could do things. They could insert and remove records, and they would correlate across logs in AWS or wherever else they found them. And it typically took them between 4 and 6 hours to find the answer. Using Humio in the way that you can search across multiple log sources, take a common key, sort of interleave the logs, and get that sort of view. And the parameters in the dashboard, we took that workflow down to about 8 to 10 seconds to get the same sort of answer. Now, they don't do many of those investigations. That was a sort of a once every 2 or 3 weeks type job. But again, you're saving 8 to 10 hours a month from doing that sort of work. It can start having a really huge impact. The other thing that Humio's tried to do, and I think it's unfortunate that we couldn't show the handoff between the tools, but it's just making this data accessible to more people, sort of democratizing access to that data, make it less of a specialized thing. We don't require the 2 or 3 people that have access to production and know how these things work. We can actually sort of safeguard it a bit and guide people through these sorts of investigations. It's been really key for a lot of our customers.
I also found that Humio views plus your ACL system is really, really helpful in not necessarily securing access to logs, but giving people predefined buckets to look through.
Yeah. Hunter, a question for you really. Again, Humio's put a lot of emphasis on the real-time nature of the logs, things being essentially available for search straight away. Is that something you benefited from directly, or?
In my experience, when I'm at the point where I need logging, I'm never at the point where I'm doing something like a live tail. It's always a postori investigation.
Okay.
So for me, I value search speed over, liveliness, because again, every big investigation I've dealt with logs, it's things like, we had this problem in the middle of the night. Every single person was asleep, but the CEO is angry. Please resolve this. Or it's things like, so at 2 a.m., this server died. Here's all the logs. It didn't page us, what's up.
Actually, that reminds me how I got into this industry in the first place. I was a front-end developer for the UI of the cloud platform of SAP. And my product owner comes with a laptop and says, I just found this on LinkedIn. And puts a message in front of me from someone in Brazil that says, I think I logged into someone else's account on SAP Cloud Platform. And we didn't have APM, it was just logging and metrics, right? So I went, downloaded the production logs of the front end, and knowing the code and having the logs, trying to find out which type of path did he had through the tool. And I see he's not doing anything strange. And then I go, after a couple of days of sifting through logs, I go to the desk of a colleague of mine and say, hey, you have actually a central monitoring system where all these requests are served from one central place. What do you know about this guy? And he comes and says, yeah, first he logged into this landscape, and then he logged into another landscape a little later with another account. So he did not log into someone else's account. He logged in his other account he forgot he had. And that was 3 days of my life I will never get back. So from there, I promised myself I would never, ever SRE a UI without having real user monitoring, because I don't want any longer to have to recreate the paths through single traces. You need to have the entire session, right?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. My first job, I was given the task of debugging why a copy process was failing for processing orders. At the time, I did not understand that Oracle had query logging that I could ask the DBA for, which would have been so incredibly helpful. And the director of operations totally would have given it to me. I just never understood to ask. So it was like 70,000 puts statements all throughout a Rails application, all being fed through logs, and me like printing things out and it looking like a conspiracy, like creating one of those like, movie style conspiracy theory dens in my corner of our team's office. And it was just a nightmare.
You pulled the X-Files, you're telling me.
Oh, no, it was worse than that. Like, while they maybe had 2 or 3 colors of string, there was a arts and crafts shop immediately below our office building. And I'm like, give me every string and every thumbtack color you got. It was crazy.
Now I have the image of you going procedural crime scene where you have to find out where the serial killer was moving all around the map.
Look, I would not do good in 7. Let's just leave it at that.
Actually, what we're talking about is the fine line of convergence between different aspects of observability. There is the what I understand Hume calls the DevOps use case of troubleshooting how a system goes wrong, where logs are a very high cardinality data source that occasionally needs context from distributed tracing to put them together. To relate how different traces fit together. That's where tracing needs end user monitoring. So that you start the monitoring, you tell the story from where the customer interacts with the machine. So the browser, the mobile application. And yeah, James, what's your take? We see in the industry a lot of APM tools that go into logging tools that go and start doing distributed tracing. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting one. There's quite a few vendors out there at the moment that have really tried to redefine and package up what the ops monitoring solution has to be. They're defining that as logging, as metrics, as APM and tracing, and putting all of these things into one tool. What we found is that those tools can be really compelling, and it goes back to something I said at the beginning. That really can work at the work group level. If your focus is you and your 5 colleagues and your one service or your one app that you're running, those converged products can be compelling and probably going to work for you. What's been really interesting is that those solutions are just not scaling. If you've got a problem where we're talking hundreds of gigs or terabytes of logs over time, trying to put those into the sort of the overly converged workgroup tools is not really proving to be a very expensive way of doing it, and for not a great solution. Generally speaking, we are seeing a lot more success in the market by sticking with some specialized point tools and building really good quality integrations between those point tools. And it's one of those things that it's a story that's repeated itself over and over again. If I think back to what I experienced on the software development toolchain side of things, there were vendors, how old am I? Like 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, that were promising these completely unified development environments where you had your IDE and your build system and your packaging and your deployment, and it was all going to be this big blue box, and it was going to be great. The fact is that those monolithic tools or those converged tools just couldn't keep up with the innovation in the different parts of the chain.
I mean,
go on.
It was one tool that did it, and that was Visual Basic.
Yeah.
No, there is another tool, and that is ABAP.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I just we all know that Microsoft made Visual Basic Net because they were that ashamed of Visual Basic. So yeah, you can get it for a bit. I found you can get it for a bit, and at some point that'll go away. And just to echo James's sentiment, I've used tons, either through demo or through actual. This is the tool that I have, and I have to go through and deal with it. There are tons of tools out there, and it really depends upon the scale of your problem. But at some point, you need a specialized vendor, because if you're trying to do everything, you can make a nice integrated package. But the reason why I really liked Humio out of everything that I looked at, the reason why I liked Instana out of almost everything that I looked at is the fact that at the end of the day, they are dedicated on single points, and they're willing to say, okay, well, no, logging should live with a tool that actually can handle that logging, and having that freedom to pull in what you need when you need it is really, really powerful. Because like at some point, for some applications, you might need logging heavier than you need APM. Others, APM is going to be your bread and butter, and you're just not really going to have logs that are meaningful. So it's up to you as the SRE to understand and make that split, and appropriately guide your organization through the implementation. Yes, Guasar, this is going to be recorded, and you can grab a copy afterwards. So like, it's up to the SRE team, and generally you, to be able to advocate for solutions that work for your company first and foremost.
It's actually something, I don't know about your point of view, but at Instana we hear there is some pressure for customers that want the single pane of glass. In particular, now that we have had a rough patch this year, as the entire world, I think, then there is the desire of consolidating tools, which means that you get with, if you're lucky, jack of all trades and masters of none. But in reality, when you try to master use cases that are so different, like observability and DevOps and governance, then you're going to end up with probably something lukewarm.
Yeah, and do you want to constrain your ability to do your ops monitoring based on the rate of innovation of one vendor? Like you want that one more thing, you have to wait for that one vendor to do it.
Assuming they will eventually.
Yeah, assuming they will eventually. And I know I talked about it, going back to the parallel of the software development workflows. I mean, you look at things like static and dynamic code analysis and all that sort of stuff. They were not part of some of those vendors' plans and roadmaps for the world. Things like containers came completely out of the blue from those sorts of vendors. And people that consolidated onto those sort of single monolithic platforms just couldn't take advantage of new technologies that were coming out.
Instana is here because we saw containers coming.
Yeah.
And we just built the right APM for it.
Yeah.
And so we are talking about the convergence, right? That there are like different industries converging together. Specifically, James, what's your take on the convergence between logs and distributed traces?
So I have the logs view of the world for this one. So I imagine my side of the world being the bigger piece. It's going to be it's going to really come down to, I think, what sort of applications and what sort of services you're monitoring and what you've got in hand. A huge amount of what happens in the ops and the IT world for big established businesses is maintaining and running what you've got today. So there's definitely that future vision, which if we had the perfect world and every app was built in the last 2 years and by people that know what they're doing, your reliance on logs and that sort of thing is going to be much, much lower. The reality is, though, that's not what 90% of people are dealing with. So for the moment, log data drives a lot of the intelligence around existing and legacy applications, and being able to capture that and combine it with the tracing and the more the APM type insights you can get out of your new applications is going to be key. So I suppose my opinion on it is you've got to be able to accommodate both and join these two worlds together for probably at least another 15 years, let's be honest.
I think it's a lot of a discussion that's covered by the word legacy. I find that legacy software is successful software. Yeah. If it wasn't good at its job, it wouldn't be around anymore, right? So I don't have a disparaging view of the world of legacy. Legacy is what puts bread on the table. It's also the reason why there is so many vintage technology, if you will, that you need your logging and your APM to fundamentally be a drop-in solution. You cannot tell developers that no longer work for you or they are no longer in the business and retired to go and manually instrument with distributed tracing applications that no one has touched in years, right? Hunter,
I mean, there are some scenarios that question my ability to maintain a positive view on that. I've just finished a project where the only way we could construct what was happening in the application was by basically rebuilding SQL databases from SOAP envelopes. So lots of XML parsing, and yeah, that was an interesting challenge. And that that is that vintage logging problem to get sort of modern app insights from.
You applied event sourcing to it. That's very 2020.
Yeah, definitely one way of looking at it.
Yeah. By the way, let's drop a plug for this. If you're in the business for event sourcing, go and check EventDB. It's run by some interesting people out there.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter, what's your take between how tracing and logs are converging?
So what I have seen, and this is, coming from basically, being in a company in the data center, getting that company to do stuff with serverless, them going forward, pushing towards more containerized infrastructures and everything. I still think that, like, you're saying, oh yeah, it might be like 15, 20 years. I don't think we're ever going to be getting rid of logging as a method for working with applications, the same way that I don't think we're ever going to be getting rid of APM as a way for working with applications. Because, so I have a friend who's was trained as a civil engineer and now does software. And his big thing that he talks about is the fact that if you're going to build a bridge as a civil engineer, there's a book that you get, or realistically, there's a book that exists that AutoCAD has implemented for you that will let you build a bridge in such a way that you can sign off on it and that bridge is not going to collapse. We don't have that for software, like fundamentally. I could probably list 5 programming languages that neither of you have ever heard of that have at least 1,000 stars on GitHub. And you too could probably do the same for me. So what I think that, and from like the SRE perspective, that, we're going to have to deal with for a very long time is that development is going to dramatically like change shape and change form, seemingly at random and seemingly on its own whims to best serve its needs, which is to get software done. We're now in a boat where we have to get the software out and we have to make sure that it stays up to meet customer needs. So from my perspective, I want both, and I want them as good as possible because I don't have the ability to predict the future. If I did, I would probably have purchased Tesla stock. People make the joke about going back in time and buying a bunch of Apple stock when Steve Jobs got pushed out. Like, the people that saw that and, played that bet are, living their best life right now. And it's the same type of problem here. I'm never going to be able to irregularly guess what an application is going to do. The best that I can do is prepare myself, and that means I need both as good as I can get them.
It also means that the less the software platform, the less you build the software is understood and codified as something that you can replicate, the more having drop-in observability and the possibility of ingesting logs, no matter the format and search them, is going to be important, because today you're not, so something that I thought for some time is that observability should be a first-class citizen of building software. And that's true, assuming that you have enough engineers that you do not need to deploy business-relevant software. Instana and Humio are in the business of skydropping observability for your applications that did not treat observability as a first-class citizen.
Right, and I think it's actually kind of interesting when you talk about observability as a first-class citizen. The one language that I can point to where they've done that, which is Erlang. Ericsson created this language for telephone switching systems, the idea being that this is a telephone switch. If the switch goes down because of a software problem and someone has to call emergency services, the line is dead. And what they did is, there's basically, you can boot up another Erlang virtual machine, connect to the production running application, and start looking around if there's a problem, reload code all without stopping. And I think it's really interesting for me because when you look at the APM space for Erlang, every big Erlang company just takes advantage of that. And you really see like the APM space just not existent. The best that I've seen is what Erlang Central pushes out, where it's really just, a metrics collector.
Exactly.
Because the language is that mature. Not a lot of other languages have done that. I think Java has tried to varying degrees of success.
Java is by far the language with the most refined capabilities of changing code on the fly. That's what you do with bytecode manipulation. It's by far the one with the safest guarantees, and the fact that, for example, with Instana, we can automatically attach to running Java virtual machines and drop our instrumentation. And when we release a new version of our agent and instrumentation, we go and patch our instrumentation so that your long-running Java virtual machines are always on the latest and greatest. That's by far the language that has the most refined mechanism.
Now,
But it doesn't have the maturity in the ecosystem.
so I will do the same things in Erlang in front of you.
Yeah.
And yeah, but no, I'm with you on that. Like the entire concept of maybe it's a good idea that you can reload code in production without stopping. Until that starts to really work its way into the languages that people are going to use, and based off of the success of Go and Rust, we're probably looking at another 10 to 20 years before it's going to really be a possibility where we see like hot code loading as a first-class citizen for application-level languages.
We're actually going the opposite way. We're making it easier and easier to actually deploy new versions in production. The entire containers as immutable movement is the opposite. You're not supposed to change code in production. You're supposed to push out a new version very fast.
Yeah, and you're handling a lot of the constraints that normally would be solved by an application. You're taking care of it at the networking layer in some cases with like Kubernetes style swap overs.
Exactly. So we are almost at the top of the hour. Do we have questions from our audience?
So whilst people are thinking of their questions, I'm going to wind back about 5 minutes. The other thing that we see, you mentioned about, or I mentioned about the idea that if we lived in this perfect world of modern apps built for observability, then logging may become less relevant. The other thing we've seen though is that as people integrate more with external platform as a service, that sort of thing, a huge amount of the intelligence and information you get about from the underlying infrastructure you're relying on, third-party identity providers, all that sort of thing, comes in the form of audit trails and audit APIs that you can pull data from. That is becoming kind of the modern log source as well. It's a mistake that we make all the time in Humio when we talk about logs, but we know ourselves what we really mean is just human readable machine data. So don't get stuck on the idea of log files on disk. We're talking about all of this additional semi-structured or unstructured human readable information that comes out of these systems.
So one example that I had to deal with in a couple of cases, if you ever do ISO or PCI as an audit standard, you have to keep human readable logs of access changes for X amount of months, and if these things are automated, you can shovel them all into, something like Humio and just let Humio give you the search that you need and then handle the retention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually we've got a question. Some sort of scale.
Yeah, it dovetails really nicely the question of Laura.
Yeah.
As log volume scales, how does the cost of Humio compare?
Yeah, the whole point of Humio is to drive down that total cost of ownership. It's not just about license pricing from Humio, but we've and I don't want to pick on them too much, but like Elasticsearch is a good example. As you try and scale up Elastic, it's free technology, but the cost of ownership can be really high just because of the volume of infrastructure that you need to run. So Humio is about just go on.
Every company where I have seen a elk cluster be run, I've also seen another vendor come in. While Elasticsearch is a very nice document search store, it requires a large amount of tuning that you do not get for free. That paying Humio money, like you get it for free. Yeah. So keep that in mind if you're. Yeah,
it's as a general rule of thumb, when we look at like an Elastic deployment, we would take maybe 5% of the infrastructure that Elastic needs. If we take a Splunk deployment, it's typically 15 to 10% of the the equivalent infrastructure. So there's the license cost side of things, and you're welcome to request a quote, but it's about the total cost of ownership that Humio is trying to drive to, and also the performance of that service.
And the amount of operations that you need to keep it running, right?
Yeah, and that's something else we've seen. Humio, as long as you don't let Kafka run out of disk space, Humio is a very happy tool to sit there and do its thing. It needs really very little care from that point of view. Some of the alternative solutions, you have to spend a lot of time keeping an eye on indexes and performance of the individual nodes. Humio has been pretty nicely built to look after itself. The other thing as well, I suppose, that's worth mentioning is that if you run Humio on-prem, you're running exactly the same software we run in our cloud service. So it's we are building it to be stable and scalable because we don't want to pay any more infrastructure costs than anyone else.
That's exactly the same thing we do. If you have a large enough need of ingesting traces, so we can give you a bunch of containers to run on Docker nodes, or soon be able to run it on Kubernetes. Something that we are going to, and it's exactly the same software that we run in SaaS. We actually have this type of installation on some of our largest customers, and we're talking about tens of thousands of agents generating hundreds of thousands of gigabytes of data a year. It's huge. All right, so Becky, do you want to do housekeeping?
We're almost at the end of the time, so I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our speakers, Hunter, James, and Michaela. As mentioned at the beginning, a link to view the on-demand webinar will be sent to you by email, or you can visit our website to access the recording. You can also check out all of our upcoming webinars by visiting instana.com/webinars. We'd like to thank you all for joining us today and hope you have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you both. Have a nice day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having me.